Global Payroll doesn't stop at processing. It depends on fast, accurate and compliant payments across borders. TransferMate Global Payments is helping organizations simplify global payments, providing embedded B2B payments infrastructure that enables businesses to send and receive funds seamlessly across more than 200 countries and in over 140 currencies. By combining its global licensing network with integrated technology, TransferMate reduces reliance on traditional banking rails, lowers FX costs, and improves visibility and control over international transactions. TransferMate supports global organizations, fintechs and payroll providers with scalable payment solutions designed for complex, multi-country operations. Find out more at www.transfermate.com.
Hello and welcome to Global PayFest 2026. I'm here joined with Patrick O'Neill, Global Payroll Partnerships Manager at TransferMate, to cover our UAE session. Welcome, Patrick. How are you?
Great, thanks for having me, Natalie.
No worries at all. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about how payments is changing the way global organizations are looking at their payroll. So we can dive straight in with the first question. Global payroll is becoming more and more complex by the day. From your perspective, Patrick, what kind of shifts are you seeing?
Yeah, so within TransferMate, just to give your viewers a bit of an idea, we work with a lot of global payroll companies to embed our payment software into their back end. So they're processing their payroll via our payment infrastructure to their clients' employees all over the world. So what we hear and see from our existing partner base is there's a big demand for faster settlement times. So employees are more insistent, and clients are more insistent on receiving money nearly instantly. Instant payment rails have become more common across the globe in many different jurisdictions. They're quite well built across Europe and the US, and some of the more emerging markets are starting to offer more timely ways of paying money, but they come with a few different nuances as well that can cause challenges for payroll. A lot of companies are looking to move into emerging markets, which causes there's different mentalities in those regions of how people like to be paid, and digital wallets are a big part of that, and being able to move money instantly through specific applications or different kind of money moving apps are very popular in some areas, and that can cause challenges for payroll teams who were maybe based across Europe or US and having to pay people in LATAM or the APAC region where there's a different way of doing things. Digital wallets, as I mentioned there, are a big part of payroll going forward. And transparency is a big part of things as well. So historically, I suppose, how people were paid has been quite hidden behind the scenes and has been only within the payroll space. And I think employees are challenging their employers more to understand how they're being paid, what kind of charges are there. Clients are trying to keep, I suppose, payroll companies more honest about what's being charged to pay their employees. Historically, maybe they were getting a lump sum fee at the end of every month to cover everything. So questions are being asked as to what is this fee, what is it for? Is it for HR, or is it for FX transactions, payment fees, etc.? So visibility and all that stuff is becoming more commonplace and can cause challenges for payroll teams across the globe. Simplification, unification in the industry. So trying to have everything within one application or product gives an advantage to global payroll staff. Not a very easy thing to achieve because of the complexity across the globe. And, a lot of things we're seeing at the minute is challenges around compliance and risk management in more exotic locations, where when you're applying people in different parts of the world that you're not used to, you're going to need local advice, local experts to help guide you on that journey. And so some companies can tend to maybe jump in a bit too quickly into these things and cause problems and knock-on issues down the tracks. So, there's so many different things out there, nuances in payroll, and it's a really interesting time, the way technology is moving, and for us as a payments company trying to keep up with that and the expectations of our clients who have their expectations of their clients and then their employees on top of it. So we're the final part of the chain, a very important part of it. But while we don't have the dealings with the clients and the employees directly, we are hearing everything on the ground from our own specific partners.
Of course. And from your perspective, where do people typically underestimate those complexities in paying a global workforce?
Yeah, and I think I touched on it there in the last question, but the regulatory compliance is an absolute minefield across the globe, and it's something we're working on at the moment in TransferMate, trying to build a solution that offers more coverage from a regulatory perspective, compliance, tax, statutory payment perspective. It's something that no one has really been able to fully solve for the industry, and I understand why, because it's every country has different rules and regulations, and if you're not sure of what those rules and regulations are, you're going to have to pay for that advice. You're going to have to do a lot of verification of data and stuff before you even employ someone or make an official first pay run, because there's huge liability, particularly on the tax and statutory side of things, if something goes wrong and payments aren't made on time, or you don't have access to correct portals in certain countries, and your company couldn't be liable to high levels of fines that are unnecessary costs that nobody wants to see. And then also, obviously, from a payroll perspective, everybody wants to be paid on the same day and accurately, and don't want to have their payroll not landing in their account. And I suppose a follow on from that is cultural differences and how people are being paid. So, you could employ people in a new country and they could have a completely different way of doing things, and your systems internally and checks in your own payroll processes may not actually be set up for these changes. So trying to sell that to employees on the ground when they're being so used to being paid a specific way, it can be a challenge, and they may not want to work for your company if you don't have these offerings on the table for how they would like to be paid. It's very much an employee-driven world at the moment, from what I can see and what I hear, and employers are having maybe less and less control over how they set their payroll up, because there's so many variations in different parts of the world. It's a knock-on effect associated with COVID, with remote working becoming more and more of a thing, and it's great for companies to be able to access different people in different parts of the world with different specific skill sets, but that comes with challenges. And on that side of it as well, like data security. So what I've seen across a lot of our partners, existing partners and new partners, is data gathering over the years has maybe been less important than it has been now. So when things are becoming more data driven and technology is more data driven, when you're looking to make improvements in your processes according to the data, a lot of companies don't actually have all the data that they need to launch these products. So there's time needed to go and gather all this missing data in order for you to get the full benefit of a new product that's going to save you time. So you kind of need to look at it in a way that while it's going to be painful for maybe 2 or 3 months gathering this data, the long-term benefits are going to be huge. And also, I think people, and this is where we come in, currency management, how you pay people in their local currency and the cost involved in that. Is it a cost that the company can absorb? Is it something that that these people want to be paid in local currency, or do they want to be paid in US dollar, for example, which is quite a global currency? There's so many variations there that can bring hidden costs to a company that are maybe not something you think about at the initial stage of employing somebody. And are you big enough behind the scenes that you maybe have treasury management where you have a treasury team that are buying and selling currency and hedging funds and having money at specific rates and it's readily available to pay these people? Or are you employing a company like us to offer this service in order to make sure that, and the challenge for that is being able to access certain payment rails, and oftentimes people have to be paid in country by a local payment rail to be compliant. So if your current bank doesn't have a local account in Brazil, for example, or in Singapore, for example, they may not be able to get that payment to the employee. So it's that can be a huge challenge and underestimated maybe within a treasury team or a finance team or a payroll team, that while it looks great on paper that we can go into these countries, how you have infrastructure with your current banking partners in place to actually achieve this. So again, scalability of infrastructure is quite a big part of things.
Yeah, of course. And it seems unbelievable that we're still talking about things like how COVID changed the way we do payroll, 6 years later? But I think it put that expectation that paying people remotely, no matter where they are in the world, is easy. And that's not the case at all. I think the other thing that's really important to note is that you mentioned it being really, really employee driven in the world that we work in at the moment. And that's really true. They say that 25% of employees would look to leave after one payroll error. And I think it's that a further 25% would look to leave after 2. So if you're not getting it right from the very beginning, you're set to lose 50% of your workforce.
And I always say this when I'm speaking to payroll, well, speaking at payroll events, is that historically I've always been paid on time, consistently, same day every month, and I never really appreciated it until I worked in a payroll side of the industry from a payments perspective. The work that the payroll teams behind the scenes do is incredible to ensure that everybody's paid according to as they should, and we see it behind the scenes. Things do go wrong behind the scenes. There's something going to go wrong in a monthly payroll in every company, no matter what you do, with the best of intentions. And like, we support our payroll partners to do things that we go above and beyond in some scenarios to ensure that these individuals are going to get their payment on the day that is required. There's ways we can step in certain areas, like, with instant payment rails, to make an emergency payment to make sure these people are funded on time. There's things that you just can't control in the payments world, with banking, screening checks, or anything that may come up from time to time, completely random, in some scenarios, and nobody has control over. So there's loads of things there that are so underappreciated, and as an employee, you probably take it for granted in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, they say you never really know who your payroll team are until something goes wrong, right?
Exactly.
So you never call them to say thanks. And I guess one of those things that can require an instant reaction, and I guess like an issue that might crop up, is when legislation starts to change. And when you're managing a multi-country payroll or a local payroll, that just seems like a never-ending thing. People are always updating legislation, updating the way people are going to be paid. So if we look at the UAE as an example here, what is it that makes payroll and payments in this region uniquely challenging compared to other global markets?
Yeah, look, as with most regions of the world, they have their own specific regulations, and the UAE regulations are quite stringent. The strict labour laws and compliance requirements, anti-money laundering rules, to make it all the payroll more complex within the region. There's cultural and language diversity there. Big expat population. Currencies, different cultures. It's all challenging. It's a great region for diversity, but that comes with its challenges. It's a great place for people to come and work and have great opportunity, but it's not simple for people to, as we discussed, payroll teams to make sure that they get the payroll right every month. And, banking and payment systems, local bank and payments infrastructure can be less developed in some areas. And, you could require alternative payment methods, which is where the likes of TransferMate and other companies like us would step in some areas. The currency and exchange rates within the UAE, the AED is pegged to the US dollar. Are you incorporating that cost into your payroll every month? You really should be paying locally on the ground in the UAE if you can at all. Like, that's probably a necessity in reality. And is your company set up in the UAE with an entity to ensure you're compliant? If you're paying internationally, it comes with high costs associated with that, and that's not going to be viable for a lot of companies to employ there. And employees often need local bank accounts in order to be paid. So there's so many different things within the region that are different to other areas. And we have a lot of banking relationships in the region, and there's very stringent audit requirements, and rightly so. And it's an area that, while it's quite successful, there is parts of it that, in part of any region, there's bad cases where, we don't want to be moving money for anybody we shouldn't be moving money to. So the banks there have strict regulations and requirements, and we have to adhere to those standards. So we have to keep those standards to ensure that we can make those payroll payments on behalf of our clients. And that doesn't come without any effort or hidden cost behind things for us as a company. It's not like we would spend a lot of money maintaining our licensing and stuff in these regions, and particularly the Middle East and the UAE is a complex area. So, I think while it has been, what I've noticed in the last period of time in the payment space in particular, like, it's very much a race to the bottom as in terms of cost and our fees. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily viable in the long run for the payments industry, because in order to offer a really good service, and particularly for payroll, when accuracy is extremely important and consistency is extremely important, these things come with a cost to companies like ourselves. So do we need to revisit what these costs and fees are, and are companies willing to pay that to employ employees in these regions? And UAE will be one as an example.
Of course, and I think, one of the big things that people tend to think when you're talking about payrolls in the UAE, it's like, well, there's tax-free zones, it's easy, right? Wrong. So what are some of those like key compliance or maybe regulatory considerations that people need to get right when paying people in the UAE?
Yeah, so the UAE labour law is quite stringent. We have to comply with it on wages, benefits, termination side of things. That's the part that people don't necessarily take into consideration for any employee that they take on, is the termination rules in certain countries. They all vary, and it's important to have that right within the UAE in particular. Employees are going to need local bank accounts for their salary payments, so they're going to have the necessary visas to be able to work there, to open local bank accounts. So that's all part of employing somebody there to ensure that their visas are as they should be in order for them to be able to actually access their salaries. The wage protection scheme is there, and it's quite important for electronic salary payments. So we have to have a provider behind the scenes with TransferMate in order to comply with WPS requirements in the region and in the UAE in particular. And that doesn't, that is a complex piece of work, and ensuring companies are adhering to those rules is quite important to avoid any issues on the ground with local labour laws. While there's no taxes on the ground for employees in a lot of scenarios, but compliance with corporate taxes are important for companies, and to ensure that they're on top of those things. There's social security contributions that are not mandatory there for expats, but it's something that they can opt into if they want, and being aware of that as a company, how you make sure if someone is wanting to pay social security contributions, that you know how to do it and how to be compliant with it. You have to comply with all the AML regulations that are there on the ground in the country. You have to be aware of what may flag certain queries within the banking infrastructure in the UAE. Monitoring obviously currency costs and regulations there. So, if the US dollar, for example, at the moment is quite volatile with the global political scenario. So, is that going to up your costs within an AD perspective, as currencies are quite closely linked? And then obviously a final part of this is data. So again, data is key to everything within payroll, and it's always been mentioned at payroll events that we are extremely important data holders. We have everybody's details in reality, and while it is hugely important to protect that, particularly in the UAE, the data protection laws are there and they need to be adhered to as well. So your data you're gathering on your employees needs to follow their local rules and regulations as well, to ensure that there's no issues that are going to come down the tracks from an audit or compliance perspective.
Sure. Okay, so take an example here. An organisation is expanding into the UAE for the very first time. What are some of those most common mistakes you see people making when they're setting up payments?
So first thing they're going to have to do is get local advice. It's so important in any scenario of moving into any new jurisdiction, and the UAE is no exception to that rule. You don't want to have non-compliance with local labour laws. That's just going to lead to issues for you from on the ground, with whether it's audits or inspections for your staff. You have to comply with the wage benefit termination clauses that are there on the ground in the local rules. You need to be fully aware of those when you're applying anywhere. Your contracts have to be watertight. You need to know what you can and can't do in that side of things. As I mentioned earlier, like having an adequate banking arrangement. So you really do need local bank accounts to pay on the ground in the UAE to be. Look, you can pay from outside, but it's going to take longer. It's just going to be more cumbersome. And all our partners who are paying salaries in the UAE are paying us via the local bank account on the ground. I don't think we've anybody outside paying from outside the UAE to us at the moment. The wage protection scheme, as I mentioned, if you're non-compliant in that side of things, is going to lead to serious issues for you down the tracks with the local regulators and potential fines that come with that, and not being compliant there is going to lead to unnecessary problems. Your documentation has to be watertight. You have to have all your data there for any inspection or regulatory audit that comes along for all your employees. Ensure that your payroll is specifically accurate, your taxes, whether it's your SSN contributions are are done according to rules. Not handling, having poor management of currency. So if you're due to pay everybody in local AED, but you're funding maybe from your US dollar entity to a local AED bank account that you hold prior to payroll, but you're not maybe maintaining a good FX rate, so you're being charged so you maybe have to pay 100,000 in AED, but you actually get hit quite considerably on the FX margin, so you might only actually receive 95,000, so you have to find that 5,000 from somewhere and get it back. So you're going to have to make another payment. That's going to take you time to get money in, and having a proper partner in place is going to make that process streamlined, that you like where companies like TransferMate step in. It's when you need to pay 100,000 in AED, we're going to send you 100,000 in AED. Your cost is going to be associated with that amount. It's not going to have to go through an intermediary bank. If you're using traditional banking methods, they could be using from the US, paying an intermediary bank in Europe, who's then taking a chunk and sending it then to the AED on their behalf. So little things like that while they're becoming less and less common, finance teams are more aware of these things than they would have been. Like when I started doing payments 10 years ago, it was more commonplace, but it does still happen. And it's something that if your banking provider doesn't have access to local bank accounts there on the ground, they're going to use an intermediary. It's going to take a fee and it's going to cost you more, and it may lead to an underpayment, which is going to cause headaches for getting more money over there and then reconciliation purposes down the track. And then overlooking the need of having local partners or local advice on the ground. That's, you should always have a sounding board there to ensure that if you're not capable of being on the ground there yourself as a company, having somebody or some company there on the ground to be able to throw questions at and to ensure that you're on top of everything you need to be is a huge part of it all at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are all things that are going on in the background by payroll teams, by payments companies, that the employee should hopefully never need to know about. We touched already really briefly on employee experience. What about employee experience when it comes to payroll efficiencies? Where do they sit within the payroll process, and how does that ultimately affect employee experience?
Yeah, it's incredible attending payroll events, listening to payroll specific workers who work in payroll every month. And again, like you say, they're so hidden behind the scenes, and they're so good at what they do, nobody knows who they are and what they do. But if you're at an event and there's a show of hands as to how many people are still doing manual process within their monthly payroll with Excel files and other things, it's actually incredible to see. I'd say you have 80-90% of the room are going to put their hands up. So while you could have automation in 80-90% of your processes, there's still parts that are still manual, and that leads to huge risk of error, delays, increased workload, human error, data entry, reconciliations. That is huge headaches for payroll teams every month. And what we're trying to achieve is to offer as much as we can within the TransferMate platform to our payroll providers in order to offer that all-in-one solution within reason. While it's not impossible, it's just probably impractical to have everything in one solution in reality, but having as much of it automated as possible is really, really key. And having a good handle, so your company has a central treasury in the US, for example, or within Europe, having control of your currency movements and knowing the time frames required to get your salary payments there in time. So a lot of what we do is with a new partner at the beginning is setting out the time frames of you're paying somebody in the UAE, for example, our flight times are this. So you need to have funds with us by a certain date in the month to achieve this value date for their salaries. So we try and build in maybe a 24-hour grace period so that if something goes wrong with them getting money to us, we have a 24-hour period to react, or if the money is late getting to us, it comes in at time that we can access these things. And while the talk around everything in the industry is instant and fast, still consistency and accuracy are the key pillars at the end of the day. So the traditional methods of paying people are still the way most companies are doing it, but we would get a little bit of resistance from time to time from some companies going, well, we want to pay these guys, we want to fund you on the day that they need to be paid. And we're like, well, it's not actually possible to do it in some of these countries. And there's companies out there saying they can do it, and fair play to them, but it comes with a lot more risk. If something goes wrong, you have no time to react or do anything about it. So while it's great on paper, it may not necessarily be the best thing for payroll down the tracks. again, regulatory compliance, we keep talking about this, it's so important in payroll, and it leads to so many inefficiencies within the process. If you have it wrong, you're going to lead to so many problems for your company, so many problems for your monthly payroll. Every country is different from a regulatory perspective, different taxes, different local taxes in some areas. Like the US has different state taxes. Even in Germany, like every state has specific taxes, even taxes to the church in some areas. Like, you need to be aware of all these things and how you pay them, because they lead to huge fines, particularly for standard, PAYE taxes we call here in Ireland. But, they're not things you want to be messing around with from a company perspective. And part of that is having incorrect data on your employees. So if you're, something for WPS, for example, you need to have very individual data for people to ensure compliance. In some countries, I think like Mexico as well, you need to have the specific individual data when you're filing and with the local tax authorities. Having all that data, if you're missing data points or specific references, is going to lead to issues down the tracks. Delayed payments, as we've mentioned, people will get frustrated, as you mentioned. Like 25% of people could leave the company in the back of not being paid correctly in 1 month, and it takes, even people may give you 2 chances to get them paid correctly. If you don't have a watertight process, and clients are like, so we have our partners, as we call it, who are payroll companies. Like, they have their clients who they have to deal with and talk to them about getting paid by a specific time. And clients don't necessarily help themselves in some ways, where they will dictate that we're not going to fund you until this date in a month. So that leads to tightening the payroll calendar. It leads to potential friction within the flow. And if things don't land on time, then we're going to have delays. And then our team behind our operations team are working hard then with the payroll company to work some miracles to get these guys paid on time. And I think the communication back to the clients and why it is the way it is can be quite a challenge. And then that just leads to reduced trust. So if something goes wrong, who's to blame? And oftentimes we get the brunt of it on our end. But if we don't get the data, the funds, everything on time, there's not a lot we can necessarily do. So it all comes down to communication between client and payroll partner, that they understand that this is when we need the money by, this is how it works. And if you're not going to comply with that, you're going to lead to this potential issue down the tracks. And is that something you want to have to deal with on a monthly payroll? And it's not something anybody wants to be doing, from talking to payroll people anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like that, that communication and that grace period in time to find a resolution if anything does go wrong is super, super important. So again, we kind of touched on how FX rates change, how that affects the payroll. Currency Currency volatility and FX costs can quickly escalate. So how can businesses be thinking about managing this risk at scale?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. There's like, currency is a way, I suppose, companies can look at it as a revenue generating side of things, or they can look at it as something that they want to have a competitive advantage over, and they want to offer as low a cost from a currency management perspective as possible. So there's different ways that companies look at it strategically, and so as a company, TransferMate, we can do it anywhere. In reality, that's the good thing about TransferMate and the products that we have. We can adapt to any client specific needs. So we're open to, and oftentimes the first question I get asked from a partner is, what's the cost of this? Well, I'm like, you need to work with us to figure out what is going to help you win the business in reality. And we can make them, we will have to fall in with that, and we will then give you our specific thoughts on that and how it's going to work. So while everybody wants to know cost, but in payroll, it's kind of strange. You kind of want to know what's going on behind the scenes first. You want to pitch something that's more specific to that client's current processes to make it fit. So like, going back to the point itself, like, hedging strategies are quite important in some scenarios. So if you're doing a lot of payments in specific currencies and conversion from USD to Euro or USD to GBP or some of the main pillar currencies that are out there globally, the use of forward contracts or options to lock in a specific exchange rate for maybe a period of a month, 2, 3, 6 months, a year, maybe in some scenarios. That's something a lot of companies look at, particularly bigger companies who would have specific individuals within their finance team who would have knowledge of hedging funds and knowing how it works and how it operates. And so that gives you a guaranteed costs from your baseline for your customers for that year or month or whatever way you want to do it. But in the scenario of currency, there's an element of, well, do we not do this and take the element of gambling on currency out of it in a way, because you could actually win on an exchange over a period of time. So if an exchange rate, if you log in an exchange rate for 6 months, you're not going to get the benefit of the better rate. So, but again, I suppose how companies get around it, sometimes they might, if the rate does get so good that they can't say no to it, they might buy another contract and no currency there on that for another period of time. So look, there's ways and means around it, and that is available within the TransferMate product. Something that TransferMate are quite strong in and is important within payroll as well, and we see a lot of our payroll partners using it, is multi-currency accounts. So being able to hold funds within your payment partners platform is quite it gives you quite a strategic advantage over maybe some of your competitors. So we will give so we can have it two ways. You can have, as a partner, hold specific currency accounts just for yourself, or you can actually give them segregated accounts in specific currencies to your clients. So they will actually only fund a specific account in their name. So it helps for reconciliation purposes, and it allows you to have control or instant access to their funds when the payroll needs to be made. So instead of waiting for a direct debit or an ACH to be pulled, that takes 3 days to clear, the money is there, the booking is made within your platform, and within the TransferMate platform, the money is already there. And within a few minutes, everything is set up and processed. And that's something that I see a lot of our payroll partners, once they get set up with TransferMate, move to those kind of accounts for their clients. Automation is really important. That's why I suppose our API and other API and tech builds are important within the payment side of things, because manually building files for thousands and thousands of employees is not something that anybody really wants to do in nowadays. The payroll team's time is tight enough as it is. So while a lot of our partners will start with a manual file upload during a pilot phase of obviously specific companies that are going to trial and test this with, but they're quick to move towards the embedded API in order to have quick access to automation, data, FX transactions built into their platform, everything along those lines. And that allows them to monitor things and report on things a lot easier. They can control the data that they get, the reporting that they need for reconciliation purposes. It's just really, really key to save on labour and costs from a finance and payroll team side of things. And then just having conversations with us as an FX company in particular, while we're a payments company at overall, like FX and currency, international currency transactions are our speciality. So that's what we're built off, and we have a team behind the scenes who know a lot about it and are there to help and have conversations. And if you feel that your customers are maybe feeling that they're being charged too much in certain ways, that come and talk to your partner and discuss with us, and is there ways that we can adapt and have individual pricing for specific customers. You can there's huge adaptability within platforms to do specific things and break it down and do things a different way. So never be shy to ask a question of your payments partner. At the end of the day, we're actually in it together in reality. Like, we're part of, for embedded within your platform, we're there to support and to help out, and don't look at it as being maybe a hindrance if something has gone wrong in a month. It's just the way that things have been set up. If a client has an issue, let's openly look at it and see how we can improve things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, people are engaging you as the experts for a reason, right? So it's just super important that they feel like they can come to you and ask those questions and have that visibility. So I guess, speaking of visibility, what does payment visibility and reporting play in helping those payroll leaders to make better decisions?
Yeah, so we would get this a lot, and a thing that we hear a lot from new customers and partners is, like, reporting is such an important part of what they do on a monthly basis, and having issues with getting the right data out of their platforms, whether it's a traditional bank or whether it's another payment provider. Everybody does things differently, and having flexibility in how you do things from a reporting perspective, having real-time insights to track payments, your cash flow, FX rates in real time. Because, look, you can build a platform and it's going to have specific data points, data fields, but behind all that, there is a lot more data behind the scenes that isn't necessarily visible within a specific platform. But we would do a lot of building specific reports for our partners behind the scenes. So they would say, right, every month we want this. So we would build a specific report, we have a reporting team behind the scenes, and they will build that every month, and they'll send it on to the account manager to send to the partner that will have every bit of data that they specifically want to ensure that they can reconcile and do everything that they need from a cash flow perspective. But by having visibility as well, it helps with error detection, so you can spot any issues at source, ideally, before it gets to that real difficult stage of the payment has left the train station, and once it leaves and the issue is spotted, it's very hard to react and do anything about it until it actually maybe lands. So if you maybe overpay somebody, which is not something that anybody wants to do, because it can be quite, most people are honest and they'll send the money back. But in some scenarios that might be a challenge, or you might send it to, there's always a screening process in place from a data perspective for beneficiaries and stuff. But if there's human error, if you're not automating things as much as you can, or verifying data, that if you add the wrong bank details, or if you added Natalie's bank details to the package, now again, account verification is coming in Europe, so that has been helpful in that you will get an alert to say that this is the account name that we have in our system. Are you sure that these match, are they correct? So there are things being brought in to help change that, because we've seen it over the years that a lot of times, I would say 78% of issues that we would get from a monthly payroll perspective in our error report every month would be that an employee has changed bank account and not maybe updated their bank details, or informed their employer that they've changed the bank account, and the payment bounces back. So, while you can bring a horse to water, you can't make them drink a lot of times. So there is so many little nuances there that are outside of everybody's control and are going to have to be resolved quite quickly. But having visibility of your payments allows you to ensure you're monitoring your compliance requirements in certain jurisdictions and countries, whether it's the UAE or wherever it may be, and your audit readiness, being able to access that. So in some jurisdictions, and not, similar in the UAE, you could have a spot audit or a check where you might need to access that immediately, and being able to have that visibility within a platform like TransferMate and others is really key to anybody to have that visibility. Another element of visibility too is your cost analysis. So if your CFO comes to you as a payroll, your head of payroll, or whatever it may be, and saying, I want a cost analysis done on last month's payroll, and there's reason maybe that unfortunately they may be looking to cut costs, and maybe there's people to be let go or something like that you're able to access that data as quick as possible in order to give the relevant reports to whoever it may be within your company. You'll see your international FX impacts on that. So if you're paying a lot of different currencies and the costs associated with it, do you need to maybe pivot away from that idea and maybe, as I mentioned earlier, buy forward, hedge currency? Do you need to maybe switch to same currency payments that might maybe less costly for you guys, but it may cause problems for your employees or how they receive their money? So that gives you a chance to look at these things. And it comes down to planning in general, like your cash flow management, your optimization of your payroll, and how all these things are facilitated within your company. So it's important that us as a company and others like us, and even banks who are will be competitive hours in way that they are giving their customers the access to the payment data and visibility there, that they can make informed decisions whenever it's required.
Yeah, and it seems like that visibility and that reporting piece is like helping payroll leaders nowadays to take that step that we all keep talking about, we all keep hearing about, of being seen as more strategic and less of the back office functions as we used to be seeing. So what does a best-in-class global payroll payment look like today, and how far away would you say most organizations are from actually achieving that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we touched on it briefly earlier in our discussion. So everybody's looking for a unified platform, everything in one spot. And to be fair, payroll companies in a way, and there's a lot of EORs who've grown rapidly over the COVID period in particular, where it became, remote working became such a big thing, and they've developed now into payroll companies and are big players in the market now as well, that at the end of the day, they are offering, in some sense, it's a unified platform. But if you peel back the onion and look behind the scenes, it's made up of probably multiple different partners, multiple different in-country partners. and it is actually quite complex behind the scenes, and managing all that, ensuring everything is accurate and working as it should be, is quite a challenge and a huge cost on any business to maintain that. So like we can only look after our corner of it, and we would work with some of the biggest global payroll players out there, and the thing that we hear a lot is like they're from a risk perspective, they would love to be dealing with less ICPs and less underlying partners. So we're being tasked with the idea of trying to incorporate as much of this within our platform and take on some of that risk on behalf of our partners. So it's, while it's unified on the face of it, there's so many moving parts behind the scenes, and there's a lot of companies do it really, really well, but I don't think it's possible for payroll to be fully unified because every country has different rules and regulations. And I think it's important at the end of the day for any company who's offering payroll in 100 to 200 countries, whatever it may be, that they're keeping up with the data locally, whether it's AI driven and there's verification of human side of things on that, because you have to tap into the local government regulatory bodies to say if there's a change in policy in certain tax regulations or when taxes have to be paid, that you're aware of it and you're able to give that information to your clients, etc., etc. And like that is really important for any company. And AI is going to play a huge part of that in the future. While there has to be a human checkpoint on that, you're going to have global tax experts within your company to verify that data and have somebody that they can tap into to ensure that data is correct. But you can take out a lot of by using AI, I suppose you can take out a lot of the manual work of having to maybe go around every week or month to check in on government agencies to make sure that you're compliant, because on the spur of the moment the government could change and the new government comes in with a budget that changes everything, and you need to be completely on top of all that. We mentioned earlier at the very beginning, I suppose, real-time payments and instant cross-border transactions, like that is such an in vogue topic at the minute within payroll, and we are adapting as best as we can. We have access to instant payment rails, we can use them, but they do come with limitations in some areas, and we make our customers aware of that thing and and sometimes they don't like to hear it because they're being put under pressure, obviously, with their competitors to be able to access it. But while we can do it, we have said this is what you're maybe like I think in the UK, for example, like there's limits per day of what you can spend on the instant payment rail, and in some countries the references don't travel necessarily as well with an instant payment rail. So in some countries it's important that the term salary or sometimes those things land with a payment to ensure that it avoids certain screening checks and people aren't held up with their payments. And if the reference in an instant rail doesn't travel fully and correctly, then that person is going to have challenges getting their funds in on time. Multi-currency support. So like what we do, having the ability to handle multiple currencies cost-effective ways, not being overcharged or not getting unnecessary costs charged to you for currency, not losing money on your monthly payroll because you're paying too much in currency fees and charges. What we see a lot of at the moment is employees having control of their funds immediately. So having like some digital wallets that, some companies are even paying them into specific company wallets, so that instead of paying them directly into their bank account, they're paying them into a specific wallet that's within their own platform, and it's up to them what they want to do with their money. They can move it back to their domestic bank account to pay their mortgages, or they can actually have this e-money within this wallet where they can maybe move it instantly wherever they want. So, they can access their payslip within these kind of applications. They can make inquiries, I suppose, directly to payroll teams. It's a form of automation, but it's kind of taken off a little bit. Like earned wage access is probably kind of part of that as well, which is very topical in certain jurisdictions or, I suppose, industry types where people can access funds ahead of payroll. And while it's it's very useful in some areas, it comes with challenges for payroll teams and change the cash flow. And while everybody likes the idea of it, it might not be possible for some companies to offer it, but then they come with the pressure of, well, this company's offering it, we need to do something. So it gets very mixed reviews across the industry as a whole. I'd say it's 50-50. While, again, it's great for employees to be able to access it. It causes huge issues behind the scenes, I suppose, for companies. And again, it's the other side of things too. If you what do you limit people being able to access their salaries if they take too much out too soon? It puts them under financial pressure at a certain part of the month. So it's an interesting product that comes with lots of challenges. And then this is finally compliance management, like as we mentioned earlier, automation for updating tax laws, labour regulations, reporting, hugely important. It's great getting payments there in time, but at the end of the day, you need to file specific reports. All of that needs to be correct. All that needs to go in on time to tax authorities as well. So huge amount of stuff behind the scenes that goes into payroll. And while most companies can take a lot of that on and do a lot of it as best they can, while it looks so unified, there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And while they may be able to, narrow down the amount of partners they have behind the scenes and offer it, it'll never be. There'll always be something behind the scenes. And like us as a payment company, like we have 100 global payment licenses, give or take, at this stage. But we do have some partners in parts of the world help us support local payments in some areas. And every company is going to rely on some, but there's parts, nobody's going to have a perfect solution to everything, because you're just not going to have the local knowledge. So while it's unified on paper, there's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes. And I think it's how the companies actually, their tech has to be spot on to maintain that and give a good experience for the customers. And it is something that we do here on the ground. While it's not our end of things, like, customer client experience is really key. And like, if you look at the global payroll space, there isn't that many options out there for companies. Like there's a lot of big players out there, and they have a lot of the market. It's kind of moving from one to the other in reality. And having that good client experience will really set you out ahead of the rest, because it's payroll goes wrong, as we talked about here, nobody's happy. It causes a lot of friction behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration is a big thing here. So collaboration between payroll and finance teams. How might you suggest that they could better work together to create a more, streamlined, cost-effective global payment strategy?
Yeah, this comes up quite a lot actually in payroll debates, and how closely aligned should a finance team and a payroll team actually be. And it's actually crazy to think in some situations that there is actually not a lot of they're not actually that closely aligned. They're completely separate parts of the business. And it's really strange, because at the end of the day, finance is a huge part of payroll. But really, they should have shared objectives, know what each other are doing, having, consistency every month, that, as a company, your payroll is going to be a specific number every month, to make sure that number is maintained. Obviously, in some scenarios, you're going to have maybe monthly bonuses or commissions that are going to vary, or quarterly bonuses that are going to vary. But, the payroll team needs to ensure that the funds are there to make the payroll, and having visibility and all that. And having shared access to data, centralizing the data within the company, that finance and payroll have access to both of it, and are able to jointly use the same data to make everything work a lot better. Regular meetings between themselves, like it can be really strange to hear that they really don't have any meetings or any hands-on experience with each other at all within companies. And the finance team will often sit on a board as a CFO, where the head of payroll is not. Whereas, like, at the end of the day, the payroll side of things is a huge part of the business, and it's debate that should a head of payroll be a role that should sit at board level as well, to give feedback on how things are going from a payroll perspective, because it is a really important part of things. And processes, at the end of the day, money is going to have to move from finance to wherever it needs to go to. And, being able to meet regularly to make sure everything's working according to plan. If something isn't maybe that efficient, that you can look at optimizing that in a specific way, maybe look at something to improve that down the tracks. Leveraging different technologies is something that I suppose a team can work together to do. So there's so many different, whether payment platforms or whatever it may be, that or a global payroll platform that they can leverage to actually do everything in one platform. So you can do your accounting in some way, shape, or form, your reporting, your money movement, everything like that can be done. There's companies out there that do all this kind of stuff. And so it's having clear goals as well, that at the end of the day, everybody has their job to do, and they want to do their job, and they don't want people encroaching in their roles. So having clear cycling set out as, this is finance responsibility, this is payroll responsibility, this is what we do together, this is what we do separately. But when we're doing things together, it needs to be done, and everyone needs to know their part to play in that. And there should always be, at the end of the day, forecasting from a financial perspective is important. That payroll are involved, as I mentioned. If the company is having a good month and salespeople are going to have a good month from a commission perspective, that's more than usual. That payroll need to be aware that this is a scenario. That finance are aware that the money is there to make this happen, and then obviously payroll is important, that they ensure compliance and that the finance team are aware of the compliance requirements for payroll. That it's not something that they're unaware of, and that when something happens, that you are going to have challenges no matter what you do. That the finance team are not completely blindsided by compliance requirements, and that they're aware that in regions that are not local to us and we have employees in, that something can spring up, and that they're aware that funds could get held for some reason. There could be cash flow issues, something could happen, and the having that close relationship between payroll and finance keep everybody in the loop, and that they understand why. Like, you don't want a finance team just getting word that, well, we have 200,000 held up in the UAE in a bank because there's a compliance check, and they're going, what's going on here? Why is this happening? That there were things like this happen from time to time. This is the process, how we resolve it. This is what we do, and having good, clear steps in place to get these resolved as quick as possible, instead of everybody, putting out fires within the business, not knowing what's going on. So there are probably a few things that finance and payroll could do together to make things better.
Yeah, that kind of like open communication and understanding of each other's roles in the business is really important. Payroll is often the biggest expense for an organisation. So for payroll and finance to not be talking to each other, to be understanding what's going on, is outrageous.
No, and I underappreciated over the years like what cost payroll was in business. It could be easy 78% of your costs easily, and it could be more in some scenarios in tighter margin business. And it's not something that can be underestimated, the importance of it. And then some organisations that would have, particularly in the public sector, where there's pensions involved, and setting money aside to make sure that former employees are paid their pensions. That's something that you wouldn't think of in a million years when you're in that scenario. And going, we have more people after retiring, we need to put more money aside, and that's another budgetary cost that I suppose organisations may not think of, more so in the public sector, obviously, but that is parts of payroll. There's public sector works as well that need to be looked after, and that's kind of a hidden thing that surprised me a few years ago until I actually saw it in operation. What as maybe a workforce is aging within a public sector business, that the costs of payroll go up a lot because the pension funds need to be put aside. So it can be quite complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're heading towards the end of the session now, but I'd love to hear from you sort of what innovations, what changes do you think that will come in within the next sort of 3 to 5 years that are really going to impact the global payments and the way we do things?
Yeah, look, we probably dabbled and touched on all these already in the last hour or so, but look, AI is going to be a huge part of everything. Whether rightly or wrongly, it's going to have its uses for sure. But again, there has to be checks and balances within that as well. And payroll is such a complex part of any business, and particularly if you have multi-currency payroll or multi-country payroll, having some form of automated AI checks on your monthly payroll is definitely going to be something of benefit. But obviously, being able to verify that data is correct needs a human touch to it as well. Real-time processing, as I've already mentioned, becoming more and more topical. People are expecting things to move faster, being able to have access to their money quicker. As I mentioned, we mentioned the earned wage access, like being able to access 20% of your salary, 30% of your salary at a time. All this kind of stuff is out there, it's happening, and employers, clients need to be aware that is something that maybe you're going to have to do in time, that you may not be able to avoid it, that employees are going to expect it, and if you don't have it, you're not going to have a competitive advantage as an employer. So those things like that are, while as I've always mentioned, like traditional ways of making payroll are still, I think, the way it is at the minute, and I don't think we're far enough along in some developments to get away from that in most cases. But I definitely think in the next 5 years there's going to be huge pivots to how people are paid, and as the next point I would make on that is your blockchains, your stablecoins, like, transparency and all this. If, for example, I was paying Natalie in the UAE, and for some reason your payment got held up by a bank for some various reason that nobody had any control over, a complete random check that they're just held it and they're waiting on information, and you need to be paid, or mortgage has to be paid, something has to be paid. With specific blockchain technology, you can take out some of that friction potentially. Payment by a stablecoin can be quite instant, while I think not a lot of people are maybe fully up to speed on your stablecoins or kind of crypto style of payments. But again, it wouldn't be something I'm overly up on myself, but it's something that as a company we're looking at, and something we're probably going to be launching in the second half of this year in some sectors of our business, to have that optionality for companies to pay that way. Cloud-based payroll, having as much automation as possible, is kind of out there now. There's so many cloud-based companies that are developing over the last 4 or 5 years. If you go to any HR event, the amount of, you just see the word cloud everywhere, and like data and being able to get to scalable size quickly, you need as much data to be able to free flow and be able to move around and to have updates. Any regulatory changes there that can be automated within any cloud-based systems are quite important. Flexibility on payments, we've already touched on this a bit over time, but so it's one thing with us as a company, and I can only speak for ourselves, and for payroll, why we're quite successful in this part of it is that we offer a lot of different collection offerings, whether we collect via ACH, reverse wire, or via a global account system, or just standard wire. So companies have 4 different options of paying us, whichever suits them best, all have different timeframes involved. And then on the other side, getting the money to the employee. So we have our local payment licenses that allows us to access local payment rails via local bank accounts. So that gives us a compliance advantage in some scenarios where it has to come from a local account. It allows us to access whether there's instant rails available in country, local ACH, direct debit, wire, whatever it may be. We will have access to 3-4 different options in each country. So the customer has the choice to pick what way they want to send money to us and then pay their employees. So that gives added flexibility and optionality, and people kind of like that idea. And then what's coming, you see a lot across the industry as well, integrating HR and payroll together. That while there have been 2 standalone sides of the business for a long time, at the end of the day, they go hand in hand. So having that in one platform can be quite useful. So I think they're the main points probably. One final point maybe is that, tax and statutory payments, global regulation compliance. So while a lot of our partners have paid tax and statutory payments organically through us over the years when they know they can pay via a third party, but the challenge for us has been to enhance that offering. So we've just gone live with a new partner to enhance our offering from a global tax and statutory perspective across the globe, which is really exciting. And so it's something that will offer our existing client base and new partners that are signing up with us at the minute more of an all-in-one service, instead of having to go out to different ICPs on the ground to pay tax and statutory payments locally. They can do it via the TransferMate platform with our embedded partner in the back end in a lot of scenarios. Extremely complex, not straightforward, but we've done a lot of work today to get to this point, and pilot has been quite successful so far. So we're really excited where that's going to build to. And that's a big part, I think, where from a payments company side of things, where if you want to be different and you want to move with the times for the big companies that are out there, I think that's something that we've tried to achieve, and I think others are probably in the same space as us as well as that.
Yeah, amazing. Patrick, thank you so much. Thank you for giving people that insight of how important global payments is within global payroll, and also, the importance of partnering with an expert who you can trust, who you can call up and talk to, who you can ask for that visibility to support with your reporting, to then be seen as more strategic in your organization, to be able to make those all-important decisions within global payroll. I think, for me, this has been a session that has really kind of woken me up to how important that is. We all hear about global payments all the time, but I think it's one of those things like remote working where you just think, like, oh yeah, well, that just happens, right?
Yeah. And one final point to make, I suppose, is like we work closely with global payroll companies and global payroll experts. Like I pick up my payroll knowledge from our clients and what happens in country. And like I'm not a global payroll expert, but I know a lot about the payment side of things. And so it goes hand in hand that never be shy about asking us for advice and those side of things. And like likewise, if I had a question for a new customer maybe on a specific country, I'll reach out to one of my clients and say, look, can you help me here with this? What do we need to do here for these countries? When I see we're doing them for you already, for example, like what things we need to watch out for. Like there's that knowledge base there between everybody and working hand in hand. If you actually look behind the scenes in payroll, everybody knows each other. It's quite a small community. Companies who maybe look like competitors on the outside are actually maybe using each other behind the scenes for certain areas. So like it's, while everyone is different on the outside, there's a lot of commonality behind the scenes of payroll, and we're all actually trying to achieve the same thing and trying to at the end of the day make sure everyone has a good experience with their paycheck every month. So it's great to be playing part of that. It's really, really interesting. I really enjoyed my time in payroll and TransferMate for the last 4 years, and I look forward to hopefully continuing that over the next period.
Amazing. Patrick, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching. Please stay tuned for our next session. And Patrick, I'll see you again soon.
Thanks a million, Natalie.